Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I want to show you how to cut and sew a monostrap bustier dress. So first of all, I want to show you how to draft a monostrap bustier pattern because that will be the basis for the dress. I'm going to have to take the bodice measurement starting with the chest line. Then I have the bust point line, the under bust point line, and the half length. So this line here is the bust span, as you guys can see. Now that I've taken all of this, the next thing I want to do is take the shoulder measurement. I have not taken off the shoulder yet because I want to explain something for you guys. So the shoulder I'm working with is 15, but I'm going to use 14 instead as the shoulder measurement. This is because it is a monostrap bustier and I will not be attaching sleeve. So I want to make sure that it sits very well in the shoulder area. If you use your actual shoulder measurement, you will see that the strap area will end up looking too wide. So 14 divided by 2 will give me 7. I'll go ahead and mark 7 here. And then take the armhole measurement. The armhole I'm working with is 7.5 plus shoulder slant allowance of 1 inch. That is 8.5. And as you can see, I have marked it here. That is how I got the chest line. So now I'm going to connect from that shoulder mark to meet with the chest line. To make sure that I have an accurate straight line, I will just come to the chest line here and mark 7 again, just like I did at the shoulder point, and then connect the 2 points together to form a straight line. The next thing I want to do is take off the shoulder slant. So I know that the shoulder slant for the front is 1 inch, but I'm going to be taking off 1.5 inch instead as the shoulder slant for the front. This will make the armhole area to relax more. There will be no form of bulging. And note that this 1/2 inch extra that I'm taking off, I will not replace it. So I just went ahead to mark out the neck measurement, the standard neck measurement of 3, so that I can connect the shoulder slant mark to that 3. After that, next thing to do is to draw out the armhole. To draw out the armhole, first of all, you need to divide the armhole measurements into 2 to find the midpoint. So after finding the midpoint, you go ahead and come out by 1/2 inch from that midpoint mark. As you guys can see, I have marked 1/2 inch there. To connect, I'll just use a straight line from the shoulder to meet with the 1/2 inch mark. Then use a curved ruler to connect the rest. So you are supposed to have your bust measurement marked out on the bust points and the chest line before taking this. So the bust I'm working with is 36 divided by 4 will give me 9. So I just mark that on the chest line so that I can connect from the 9-inch mark to the midpoint of the armhole. So I just place the curved ruler this way and then connected it. After drawing out the armhole, the next thing I'm going to do is connect from this bust span to meet with the midpoint of the armhole. So note that this bust span line stops at the bust point. It does not extend past that. Also, please note that this is being done on fold. The reason why I am doing this on fold is because it's a monostrap bustier. So because of the cutout I'm going to do from either left to right or right to left, this pattern has to be on fold to make sure that you get your full front pattern. And also, if you're familiar with a princess that's bustier, then you will observe that that is what I am doing for this particular style. That is because it is easier to cut out a monostrap bustier if you use a princess that bustier instead of a shoulder that bustier. So guys, after I've connected from the armhole to meet with the bust span line, the next thing to do is to take the suppressions. So there are 3 places where suppressions will be taken off. One is at the under bust on both sides, and then the other is going to be at the armhole area. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to come to the center front and mark 0.75 inch at the under bust point line and at the half length line, and then just use a straight line to connect. So after that, I'll go ahead and take off the rest on the side front. The maximum I like to take off the center front is 1 inch, but I like to use 0.75 inch. So the total I want to take off the under bust is 2 inches. Since I have taken 0.75 inch from the center front, I'll go ahead and take off 1.25 inch at the side front area and then use the straight line to connect it. Remember, this is to be taken off at the under bust point and at the half length. So that is the suppression. The next one I'm going to do is at the armhole area. So you're going to come to this line here and then come down by 2 inches. 2 inches is the standard. Now what I want to do is connect everything. Before I connect it, I'll come to the bust point line, come up by half of an inch. After marking that, I will now connect from the 2 inches at the armhole area to meet with the half-inch mark. So guys, to connect the other side, I'm also going to come to the bust point line again and go down by half of an inch. For this side, you want to make sure you're using the curvy parts of the ruler. Okay, just watch the way I'm placing this ruler here, and then I'll connect from that under bust point to meet with the bust point, and go ahead and do the same thing for the other side. So can you guys see that after connecting all of this, there is no sharp edge? That is because of the half of an inch I took above and below the bust point line. So that is the reason why I did it in the first place. The next thing I want to do is to extend this side by another 2 inches. So that line where I took off from the armhole, I'm going to be extending it by 2 inches. This is to make sure that the armhole is still intact after drafting the pattern. So if you don't do this, by the time you want to join, you will notice that this center front and the side front does not match, because the side front will be short. It won't match up with the other side. So after extending the line by 2 inches, I'll go ahead and ease it back into the armhole. So you can see that I'm using the inner curve for this side to make sure that I'm not adding too much excess to the armhole area. So guys, this is it. You can see that it's looking very sharp, but by the time you join it, everything will align properly. That is everything for the suppression. The next thing to do is to take the round measurement, starting with waist. The waist I'm working with is 31. 31 divided by 4 will give me 7.75. So I'm going to be replacing what I took off from the half length, which is 2 inches. And then I'll come to the bust. The bust I'm working with is 36 divided by 4 will give me 9. I already marked that on the chest line area. So I'm just going to go ahead and connect all of this. So you're probably wondering why I replaced what is on the waist, but I did not replace whatever suppression has been taken around the armhole area. That is because there is already an excess around that area, which is why I'm taking it off. But for this waist, there is no excess whatsoever, so I need to replace the waist measurement to make sure that the waist is still 31 after I'm done. So I just went ahead to add my seam allowance of 2 inches to the pattern. You can see that I have already added the joining allowance to the half length area before, which is half of an inch. Let me just label it for you guys to see. So guys, this is the allowance for this side and the allowance for this side. So all of this part that I am highlighting with the green marker is going to be cut off, okay? And also, if you want a more detailed tutorial on how to draft the princess that Bustier pattern, then you can go ahead and check the description box. I have a more detailed video on that. This is just the process of creating a monostrap bustier. The next thing that I want to do now is to take off the side dart. This side dart is the difference between the front half length and the back half length. The front half length I am working with is 16 inches and the back half length is 15 inches. So I'll come to this bust point line and come down by 1 inch, which is the difference between the front and the back half length. And then I'll just connect this to meet with the bust span line. So this is also going to be taken off. But remember that this pattern is on fold, so I have to make sure that this is showing on the other side. For that reason, I'm going to use my marker to highlight these 3 points again. and I know that it is going to show on the other side of the paper because the marker is very pigmented and it stains easily, which is why I am putting extra here. So I'm just highlighting the whole place so that when I raise the pattern, I will see it on the other side. So this is it here. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is to determine how wide I want the strap to be. So I want it to be just 3 inches wide. So I'm going to come from this side and mark inwards, mark 3 inches. So the depth of the neck does not really matter since I'm still going to cut out the monostrap bustier, but I'm just going to mark 4 and connect. After doing that, I'm just going to go ahead and cut everything out so that I can close up the side parts. For the side front, I'll just leave it the way it is because I'm still going to close up the side darts, and after closing it up, I will need to replace whatever will be cut off as a result of closing the side darts. So guys, this is everything cut out. For the front, I'm not cutting out the neckline. So what I want to do now is to close the side dart, and to do that, I'll just fold in the paper like this, and then I'll use sellotape to hold it down. So you can see that there is a gap, which is the reason why I have not yet cut out the side for this front completely, because I know that gap is going to be there after closing the side dart. So I'm just going to use tape to hold it down, then replace that gap before cutting off the excess, then use this first pattern to cut out the other one. After doing that, the next thing to do is to join the patterns back together to be able to cut out the monostrap design. Before doing that, you want to take all of the measurements to make sure that the points are intact. You can see that for this side that the lines are showing, it's easy to join it together, but for the other side fronts, the lines aren't there, so you have to measure it out and make the mark before joining. So I'm just going to use a transparent tape to hold this down. After doing that, the next thing to do will be to cut out the one shoulder design. So I'm going to start from this other side and then connect it all the way to the armhole. Remember, I did not fully draw out the neckline because I know that that wouldn't be the main neckline I'll be using. So what I'm doing here is to just use my free hand to make a light sketch before I make it very bold. So you can see the way I'm just using a slight curve to connect from one shoulder to meet with the armhole on the other side. If you want the armhole to not be too exposed, you can raise it up a bit more. Looking back, that's something I wish I would have done, although the dress still turned out beautiful. But if you want more coverage, it's best to raise the armhole higher a bit so you come up more rather than from the main armhole line. So if you're paying attention and really following what I'm doing, you will see that cutting a one shoulder dress is not very hard. So all you need to do is to just make sure that you cut your full front pattern so that you can cut out the one shoulder design. My master curve wasn't really working for connecting the line I drew earlier, so I just decided to use my free hand to make the line bold. You can see that the line is drawn already. I just wanted to make it more bold with the curve, but I think I'll just use my hand for this instead. So guys, this is the main thing in cutting out a one shoulder dress. If you want to make it padded, then just do a princess dart bustier. A shoulder dart bustier cannot work for this. To just make the whole process more complicated. So a princess dart bustier is best for this. And if you don't want a bustier, just draft your basic bodice pattern and then follow this exact technique. So I'm not cutting on the main line because I am adding 1/2 inch seam allowance for joining, for turning the lining and the fabric later. So I forgot to add seam allowance to the armhole area here. I'm going to take note of that when I am cutting on my fabric. So please, if you know you're going to forget, just add the 1/2 inch seam allowance to the armhole area before cutting on the fabric. So I wanted to leave the pattern like that. I decided to just add the half an inch seam allowance so it will be easier for you guys to understand. You can see I have added the half an inch seam allowance in the armhole area. After doing that, the next thing to do is to make the keyhole cut out on the bustier. So if you're paying attention to the picture you can see on the screen here, you will see that this cutout starts from the center front, like the center point of the bustier, and it ends around the center of the shoulder as well. So I'm just finding the midpoint between the armhole and the neckline so it will serve as a guide for making the cutout. After marking out the midpoint, from this area here, I decided to come out a bit more on both sides. So towards the center front, I'll be using about half of an inch, and then towards the side, I'll be using 0.75, like that's towards the side front. That's because the side front area is more open and a bit more curvy than this side. So I'm just using a pen to connect everything together to be sure that it's exactly how I want it to be before using a marker to do it. So you can also come out equally on both sides. I think I actually prefer when you just take out the same thing on both sides. You can see that this one is a bit more curvy towards the side front, so that is exactly what I was going for. But if you want something equal on both sides, then just take half of an inch on both sides or 0.75 inch, depending on how wide you want it to be. But I don't recommend taking out 1.25 inch at most. So what I'm doing now is tracing out the seam allowance. I'm using 0.25 inch as the seam allowance here. You can decide to use half of an inch if you want, that's completely up to you, but I prefer to use 0.25 inch for this side. So that's it for the monostrap bustier. I'm going to go ahead and cut everything out. After drafting the front pattern, the next thing to do is to draft the back pattern. This one is really easy to do. You just need to take note of the back half length and the front half length. Remember, the front half length is 16 and the back half length is 15. So I've gone ahead to draw a straight line at the top of the paper. It might not be obvious on camera, but the paper here isn't straight, which is why I first of all wrote a line. So I went ahead to mark out the armhole, the bust point, and the half length. The armhole is 7.5 plus 1 inch as shoulder slant allowance, that's 8.5. Bust point 10.5, and the half length, like I said earlier, is 15. I added half of an inch to the half length to serve as the joining allowance. The next thing I did was to take the shoulder divided by 2, and then I marked out the bust span. Remember, the bust span is 7 divided by 2, 3.5. So this is going to extend from the chest line to the half length, unlike for the front that was from the bust point to the half length. At this point, I'm going to slow down. I know I rushed the beginning of this pattern making for the back, and that's because it's basically the same thing I did for the front. So the next thing I want to do is to mark out the shoulder for the back. I want to make sure that the both of them are equal after joining. So I just placed the front pattern on the back pattern to mark out the shoulder point. Note that when marking this, I did not add the seam allowance. I just played it back for you guys to see, okay? The next thing to do is to mark out the armhole. First of all, I'll be taking out the shoulder slant of 1 inch and then finding the midpoint of whatever is left. From the midpoint, I'll go in by half of an inch and just repeat the same thing I did for the front. So I noticed that I did not add zip allowance when drafting this back pattern, but because I still have a bit of pattern paper folded in, I was able to just expand the pattern a bit and add the zip allowance. The zip allowance I'm using is 1.5 inch. I just marked that out and then use a straight line to differentiate between the actual measurements and then the zip allowance. Next thing I'm going to do after marking out the zip allowance and drawing the armhole is to take the round body measurements. So this is just the bust roundness and the waist roundness. plus that allowance. Then I am adding the 2-inch seam allowance. So the next thing you want to do is to take out that allowance of 0.75 inch on both sides. So that's the allowance I usually use for my dart. Instead of 1 inch, I use 1.5 inch. 1.5 inch divided by 2 will give me 0.75 inch on both sides. Then I just connected from the midpoint of the armhole to meet with one of the dart leg, just like I did for the front. The next thing I'm going to do is make adjustments to the zip allowance to prevent zip bulge. And how is that done? So you go to the zip allowance here and then you come in by half of an inch. This half of an inch is going to be cut off, so you are just going to connect it from the waist all the way down, and then we place that half of an inch at the waist area so that the waist roundness will not be short by 1 inch. And then I'm just going to reconnect. Then you're going to come up again by 1 inch. You're going to do that on the zip allowance as well. So you're also going to connect this, and this is going to be cut out. But by doing this too, I can guarantee you that you're not going to have any zip bulge whatsoever, unless if there's another error that you made when drafting the pattern. So all of this that I'm marking is going to be cut off. So guys, remember that this is a mono strap dress. The front is already cut in a one shoulder style, so definitely the back has to match, because if you leave the back the way it is, how are you going to join the other shoulder for the back? So this pattern is also on fold. Okay. After cutting out the pattern, I'm going to go ahead and open it up so that I can cut out the one shoulder design for the back. So when cutting out the design for the back, you have to be very careful of two things. Number one, making sure that the both sides rhyme and you don't cut the one shoulder design in the opposite direction. Number two is going to be when you are doing the zip allowance area. But don't worry, I'm going to walk you guys through how to do that, so you just pay attention. Just like I did for the back, just like I did for the front, I'm going to go ahead and join these two patterns together so that I can get the monostrap design right. After doing that, I'm going to join the zip allowance together as well. So I'm going to grab the front pattern again and then place this on the back pattern. You can see that I flipped the front pattern, right? So I flipped it, assuming that I'm facing the right sides together, just like I would do for the fabric, to make sure that I don't cut this in the opposite direction, because if you do, then the fabric is wasted. You have to recut either the front or the back to correct it. Okay, so what I'm doing now is just tracing the curve from the front and transferring it to the back. So please pay attention to this side as well, because there's going to be a bit of adjustment when I reach this zip allowance area. So you can see that I stopped here, right? Now if you continue tracing it like this, you are going to end up having a gap. The center back will not align when you are joining the zip. So you can see that I already marked where the other side stopped before the zip allowance started. So what I'm going to do is to just fold up this back pattern again. Just watch, please pay attention, or you can watch this side twice. And then what I'm going to do is to draw a straight line for this zip allowance area only, just to make sure that when I close up the zip allowance, the back will match. Okay, and then I made sure that it's showing on the other side, which is why I allowed the ink from the marker to pour out a bit more. Now from that mark on the front pattern where the zip allowance stopped or started from, whichever term you want to use, we are going to place it on that mark and then continue tracing out the one shoulder design. So just in case you guys didn't notice, I'm tracing this plus the seam allowance, so I will not be adding any half of an inch seam allowance to the back pattern again. So you can see that there is a gap, right? But when I close up the zip allowance, you see that this matches perfectly. Can you see that? This is a very common mistake that beginners make when making a one shoulder or an off-shoulder bustier. So I hope that this particular part of this tutorial have been able to help some of you guys out there that have been having issues cutting out this design. So you guys can see that when I just draw out the straight line for the other side of the pattern, this is what it looks like, right? So this is how you want your pattern to be. I know it looks weird, it looks funny, but I can assure you that when you join everything together, it will make sense. So I'm going to go ahead and also cut out this part of the pattern. It's not going to be needed in the dressmaking process. So guys, that's it for the back pattern. Please make sure that you label this before cutting. I'm using F to indicate that this is the front, that is the right side for the back. Because if you cut some in one direction and some in the other direction, you can also end up wasting your fabric, because like you won't be able to join the pieces together. And that this is a one shoulder top, so everything goes in one direction. So please make sure that you label. For the front, it's not hard to know the right side and the wrong side, but for the back, you can easily mix it up. So make sure that you label it, okay? So I originally wanted to make the sewing part of this tutorial to be a part 2 that I would upload next week, and I had already compiled everything that way, but I just decided to merge everything together. I noticed that people don't really like videos that are longer than 25 minutes or 30 minutes at most, which is why I wanted to separate it. But I'm just going to go ahead and merge the part 2 to this video so you guys can watch it all at once. So that's what's going to be playing now. Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. In my last video, I showed you how to draft a monostrap bustier. In this video, I'm going to take you guys through the sewing process to make sure that you achieve a neat look for the keyhole area and for the neckline as well. We won't be using bias in this video. Everything will be done with lining, so please take note of that. I know this is something that is very tricky for some people, so I'm going to be taking you guys through that, and that is the main focus for this video: the bustier and the beading. I won't be showing you guys how to cut out a mermaid skirt, because I have other videos regarding how to cut and sew a mermaid skirt. So let's get right into it. This is the pattern here already, and the material I'm going to be using for this is a sequin material, and I'll be using doll face as the lining. So this sequin material is very stretchy. So let me show you guys one trick for working with a sequin velvety material, because this is velvet with sequin that's stretchy. So 3 tricky things here. First thing you need to do is make sure that you iron stay to the fabric before cutting. Note I said before cutting, not after. If you iron stay after cutting out the pattern on the fabric, you might end up with a bigger piece because the material might stretch out. In some cases it might shrink, okay? So depending on the material, but this particular fabric will stretch out. So make sure that you iron stay before cutting to make sure that what you have is correct. So guys, as you guys can see, I have added the sequin and it's not stretching anymore. This is me showing you guys that the material is not stretching, okay? So the stay is going to make the material not stretch anymore, and it's also going to make it easy for your sewing machine to sew, because under some sewing machines, especially the blackhead sewing machine, cannot sew something like this very easily. So with stay, it's going to be easier for you to sew. I'm going to go ahead and cut on my fabric off camera, okay? So for this front and for the back as well, you want to make sure that you add seam allowance to all of this area where you're going to be joining. So 1/2 inch should be more than enough for joining. Make sure that you do the same thing for the back piece as well, okay? And if you watched the last tutorial, you will know that I've added seam allowance to the upper part already. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and then show you guys what to do next. This is all of the pieces already cut out. I've cut on the sequin material and I have cut on the doll face as well. I'm going to keep that aside and focus on the front. So for this front, when cutting out the keyhole, it's advisable to cut for both the sequin and the lining, which is what I did. You can see the doll face is also pinned to the sequin material. This is to make sure that you don't end up over expanding the keyhole area for either the sequin or the doll face, okay? So that is already cut out. And please note that I have padded this already. I have a separate video on how to pad a princess dart bustier, specifically a princess dart bustier. So if you watch that video, you just follow the exact same technique and then you can go ahead and pad the bustier. Okay, I won't be showing that in this video. I'm going to go ahead and separate the pattern from the fabric so I can go ahead and start sewing everything together. What you just want to do is face right sides together. You want to make sure that the under bust point is matching, okay? And then you're going to go ahead and pin this down. When you are sewing, sew from the bottom all the way up, so that if there's any adjustment or any error, it will be easy to correct that way than when you start from top to bottom. So I'm just using a pin to secure the under bust point as well as the bust point. So before joining, you want to make sure that you notch all of those points that I mentioned to make sure that the both of them align. And I'm going to go ahead and repeat the same thing for the other side. Then sew it down using the 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to repeat the same thing for the back of the top. So you can see that I added 1/2 inch joining allowance all round except for the zip allowance area, since the joining allowance is already added to the zip. So you want to face right sides together. This is why I said in the first video that you should label the pattern, okay, so that you don't end up mixing it up. So this is what it looks like. If you don't label it, it will look confusing. So this is it. I added 1/2 inch to the armhole area for that side only because it was not added on the pattern, but the rest of them are intact, okay? So I'm just separating the pattern and then facing right sides together. I'm just going to use a pin to secure it. Also make sure that all of the points are aligned. The back is easy to sew compared to the front because there isn't any curve whatsoever. So this side shouldn't be hard for you to sew. Just make sure that you pin down to prevent one side from getting shorter than the other. Because even if you drag the pattern correctly, something like that is bound to happen if you don't pin. After pinning everything down, I'm going to go ahead and sew it using the seam allowance. And please note that it is the exact same thing I did for the main fabric that I am going to repeat for the lining. So I don't need to go over that again and make this video unnecessarily long. So guys, this is all of the pieces here already joined together. The next thing to do is to turn the lining and the fabric together. So you want to make sure that you iron all of this out before sewing, but currently there was no light, so I just had to quickly work on it just like that. But don't do what I do as I say, not as I do. So make sure you iron yours to make sure that it is easy to work with. So this is the back piece. To turn the lining and the fabric, I'm going to face right sides together, making sure that all of the points align. Then I'm going to sew the armhole down, the neckline, and the sides. This is for the back only. So notice that I'm not sewing the shoulder area. It's just the sides that I mentioned that I'm going to stitch down. Then we'll move on to the front. So for this front, sewing the lining and the fabric is not hard, but if you are not watching what I'm doing or paying full attention, you're not going to get it, okay? Because I'm not using bias at all for this. I don't like the idea of using a bias for this type of fabric. Here I'm just cutting off the excess around the armhole. So guys, pay attention to what I'm going to do. First of all, I'm going to face right side together. The first part I'm going to be turning is this keyhole area. So I'm going to use a pin to secure it all round to make sure that one is not stretching out more than the other. Okay, so this is why I said you should cut the lining and the fabric at the exact same time to make sure that everything is exact. So I'm pinning it down all round, and after doing that, I'll go ahead and stitch it down. So for this part, you want to make sure that you are taking the same seam allowance all round. If not, that keyhole area is going to be looking a bit crooked. It won't look smooth. And also when you get to this sharp point, make sure that you don't do a curve. You can see I stopped here, then I flipped the fabric over to do it. If you just go around, you are going to end up creating a slight curve around that area. So guys, after sewing it, this is what it is looking like. Okay, so to flip it, you're just going to gather up the lining and pass it through that hole. See? And with that, you have closed up the rough edge of the keyhole area. So the next thing to do now is to hem the neckline. That is the next part that is a bit tricky. Okay, some people prefer to use bias, but let me just show you guys how I'm going to get this done. Before I continue, please take note that you have to notch this area before ironing. If you don't notch it, it is not going to relax. So make sure you notch it, especially the sharp points. Notch it down before you iron. So guys, to hem this neckline, you basically want to face right sides together and stitch it down. But the problem is that this space is very small, so to be able to fold it up, it's going to be a bit tricky. So you can see that I am rolling the fabric here. You want to make sure that you roll it very tightly so that you can bring out the right sides of the main fabric and the lining. You're basically going to wrap it around the rolled side. Okay, let me do it again. So you're going to roll it up. After doing that, then you're just going to open this side up and face the sequin and the lining together. You're going to use a pin to hold it down, because if you don't, everything is going to unravel. So guys, this is what it is looking like after I am done folding it up and pinning it. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this down using the 1/2 inch seam allowance. You want to be careful with this to make sure that you don't end up catching the fabric that is folded in between the lining and the fabric. Okay, so you have to be careful. If not, you're not going to be able to turn this out if you end up stitching the rolled up side in this bustier. So take your time with this. As you guys can see, this is looking very tight, and you can see how I'm pressing my fingers down to hold it in place. I said it earlier that this process is not going to be breezy. It's going to require a lot of patience, so please take your time with this and you're going to love the results. So guys, I've gone ahead to stitch it down and turn it out. Turning it is not very easy. You just have to be careful with it so you won't end up ripping the stitch, because it's going to be very tight. So this is what I have. The next thing to do is to join the front and the back together. You'll notice that I do not use an inseam finishing for this part, and that's because I want my client to be able to adjust it easily if there is any fitting issue, because I did not take a measurement for this. I'm just doing it on her behalf, but luckily it fits perfectly well without even making any adjustments to it. So for this part of the shoulder, if you stitch it down like this, you are not going to like the result. So let me show you how to get it done. This is going to be joined using the inseam finishing method. So for this back, you're going to just pass your hands through it like this and then grab the front shoulder. Then you are going to turn the rough side of the back together. Make sure that the shoulder aligns perfectly well. Okay, one should not be bigger than the other. If you follow the technique I used in drafting the pattern, then the shoulders should be identical when you want to join it. So I'm just making sure that I arrange it well. Then I'll go ahead and pin it down. After pinning it, I'll stitch it using the 1/2 inch seam allowance and then turn the right side of the back, and you'll see that the stitch will be completely hidden. The rough edge of the shoulder will be completely hidden, because the rough edges, you know, it's a sequin material. You do not want it showing. First of all, it will make your work look rough, and secondly, it's going to make your client uncomfortable because it will be itching. So please keep that in mind. So this is what the shoulder area is looking like after I have joined it together. You can see how neat it is on the inside and on the outside. This is how you want yours to look like. So after this, I didn't really film much of the sewing part because I feel like I've tackled the main issue. So after this, I just joined the sides using the seam allowance. Of course, you have to take your measurements again to be sure that they are accurate before just taking out the seam allowance that you added, because you may need to add more or take out more, okay, to make the dress fit. And of course, I fixed the zip off camera. So one tip I'm going to give you guys regarding the skirt is to make sure that whatever your waist is, just take off 1 to 2 inches off it, because the material is stretchy first of all, and also you won't really need a dart for this since the material is a stretchy material. So if you are going to add 1 inch as your seam allowance, just make it half of an inch, and then when you are sewing, still take out that 1 inch because the material will stretch out. Anyway, this is what the dress is looking like so far. The next thing to do now is to bead this dress, and for this I'm going to be using black crystal beads and regular black thread and beading needle. The process of making the beaded sleeve is very easy. Even a beginner can do this. So you're basically just going to pass the needle through from the back of the dress. I'm sorry it's not showing properly here. You're going to pass it through from the back and make a double loop. Can you see? I passed it through the first time and then passed it through the second time and dragged it, okay? So you're just going to tighten the thread to the fabric first, then you pass in your bead. Okay, so I started with 1.5 inch away from the shoulders on both sides. After that, I made the spacing to be 1 inch apart. I did end up filling in the gaps in some places, but basically you should be able to like wing this as you go. So I just passed in the bead. You know, it's going to be like a cascade kind of sleeve. So one is going to be longer than the other. I started small, just passed in a few beads and then tacked it down to the other side of the shoulder. So I started from back to front. You can start from front to back or change the pattern as you go. So you want to make sure that you tack this down very tightly, okay? And I advise using the black thread instead of invisible thread, since the dress is all black already. I prefer to use a matching thread when beading. So it's when I'm using like a translucent bead, or I'm making a white dress, or I'm beading like a skin net area, that I like to use invisible thread, okay? So I've tightened this one. I'm just going to repeat the same process for each of the lines, okay? So that is it for this tutorial. Make sure you're tacking on the back of the dress. Don't let the thread show on the front of the dress, okay? So this is the final look of the dress. You can see it's looking really elegant, classy, and it is exactly like the picture. Just look at how good looking my client is in this dress. Anyway, if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section and I'll make sure to respond to everyone. Also, please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it and share this with your friends. See you guys next week Friday. Bye.